The mainstream narrative has narrowed its scope over the past 10 years in what it defines as European culture, and this has been by design, as there is no evidence that it occurred organically. In fact, there is ample proof that the characterization of whiteness and the deliberate dislocation of this modern concept from its cultural and racial core, that of a European realization and identity, has been a massive victory by the liberal elite over the collective consciousness of European peoples. Furthermore, this continued effort to abstract our self-identity into the synthetic abstraction which has come to be known as white will assuredly annihilate whatever sense of distinctiveness we still have left, while leaving our entire group vulnerable to the racialist, marginalizing policies of the cultural Marxist establishment. The whole point of this endeavor has been to pacify the instinctive urge to defend one's family, nation, and birthrights. It is that simple. The result has been the manufactured migration of 150 million non-Europeans into Australia, Europe, and North America over the past 50 years, without a significant incidence of pushback. This could never have occurred with a group of people who were self-aware. So, if race is a social construct, then why promote such an antithetical label as white into the mainstream dialogue? And why promote this label only in negative terms? Won't people see through this at some point? Well, the answer is twofold. The label is being sold to non-Europeans who will either justify further their victim status or use it as invective against a competitive group. Conversely, it is simultaneously being sold to Europeans who will begin to identify as white. The former transfers greater cultural power to an underclass of potential enemies to European culture. The latter arrests the development of European identity by making us ashamed of ourselves while identifying with a negative, completely false concept that is empty of any content. In other words, we are now identifying with nothingness. This must be repeated here. The mainstream media and the cultural Marxist academic elite have essentially emptied Western society of its cultural content. And when you cannot identify with anything having such content, you have nothing left to defend. The nightmare of this scenario and the black magic of those behind it should tell you how deep this group's hatred of our people and culture runs. But this goes beyond simple genocide. And while we are on the topic of genocide, if we were to use the standard definitions and legal criteria when using the term white to represent the native European peoples, then most, if not all, of the conditions have been met for establishing that genocide has been conducted by our political elite, with international entities in support, against the populations of Australia, Canada, the United States, and the EU. In the United Nations Convention on Genocide, Article Number 2 stipulates genocide as any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. When you consider that abortion propaganda has exclusively targeted European women, mass non-white immigration has displaced the entire white working class in the West, fundamentally altering it on social, political, financial, and psychological grounds while depopulating it wholesale, then almost all of the criteria have been met to substantiate genocide under international law. But because race is a social construct, none of the claims above have any value, since race only matters when it can be used to violate or dishonor native Europeans or to entitle non-Europeans, just as race can be used to support the socio-political development of ethnic minorities, but must never be used to isolate the behavioral patterns of these very same groups for gathering statistical data. The hypocrisy between these comparisons is obvious to most Europeans living in the West. But without a core identity operating, and the social consequences for those who speak against these discrepancies, only a few faint voices can be heard from the dark. And if you listen closely enough, you just might make out the last dying echo of an entire race of people.